Hey there, my name is Kate.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Emily.
Today we will be talking about wealth and political corruption during the Gilded Age, and we're going to compare that to today.
We want to focus on the wealthy industrialists and labor unions during the Gilded Age.
We were inspired by an earlier conversation where the three of us were talking about how we're moving backwards as a society. And we were also inspired by looking at a political cartoon by Joseph Kepler.
The cartoon was published in Puck magazine on January 23, 1889. It's based on wealth and politics in the Gilded Age. It depicts exceptionally large, rounded businessmen that represent their corporate interests hovering over tiny senators.
The tiny senators are referring to show how the legal system was corrupt and useless, as well as how the industrialists had a huge influence on the tiny senators, which caused undermining illegal activities.
Now, when we're talking about current times, it's important to talk about the political corruption and the control that corporations have over the country, both then and now. A lot of people tend to overlook the parallels between now and the Gilded Age, so what we need to do is connect that corruption back to its roots in the Gilded Age.
So, the Gilded Age was an era from 1865 to the 1900s, which was consumed by exploitation and greed. Due to the rise and spread of industrialization in large corporations, the quality of life was destroyed. So imagine it's the late 1800s and you are just living your life as a simple farmer in rural America. Next thing you know, farming isn't as good as it used to be, and everyone has to move to the city for industrial jobs and huge corporations.
When you move into the city, you tend to figure out that these monopolies aren't as reliable as they are made out to be.
Most, if not all, of these wealthy industrialists and monopolists use really shady business practices to get all of their wealth and power. Most of them would threaten all of their competition to push them out of the market or buy out their competitors. Rockefeller did that in the Gilded Age with the Standard Oil Company, and that's how he got rich. Similarly, Mark Zuckerberg has done that today with social media.
Yeah, I was looking that up online, and I found out that Zuckerberg owns a lot of these social media apps, and I guess he's just purchasing all of these profits to put him up in the market, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's really interesting too, because he also bought the Oculus and renamed it Meta, which is really interesting because compared to other things he's bought, like Instagram and WhatsApp, it seems like a completely different type of market that's unrelated. So you can tell that he's just doing it to expand into more and more wealth. During the Gilded Age, a great example of how much wealth these industrialists had was the fact that they were able to buy their way out of military service in the Civil War, which was required of everyone else in the country.
And I guess that reminds me a lot about how even during that they had the need to exploit and abuse their workers. And that reminds me of what's happening nowadays. Have you all heard of the app Temu?
Unfortunately.
Yeah. It is very similar to Shein, and it's promoting fast fashion in the industry by selling these very cheap products for basically free. And this is giving no leeway for workers to get their profit, but they are working their butts off for little to nothing.
And it's just so unfair how much they're being exploited, because a lot of people just see the cheap prices and don't realize what's behind it.
Exactly. You know, it's the price tag. That's all they care about. But when you look behind it, it's so much worse than it's made out to be.
Yeah, and I mean, that's really similar to during the Gilded Age. A lot of expository works were written, such as The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, where he talked about, the horrible and disgusting conditions in the meatpacking factories. And it just results in low-quality conditions for the workers and then just low-quality products. So it's really not benefiting anyone except for those really wealthy industrialists who are owning those companies.
Which are making it seem like it's a trend. And more people are getting these products.
And with that exploitation, it's kind of, led to a rise in unions and strikes overall. And that happened both then and now.
Yeah, so during the Gilded Age, those workers began protesting for better pay and working conditions, which led to the Haymarket riot that involved 8 deaths from a bomb. The police officers decided to blame it on the workers despite the lack of evidence, which is really messed up.
And that's so sad that it has to come to that extent, that someone has to, or multitude of people have to die in order for people to see how big of a problem this is.
To achieve like a livable wage and basic rights, it's just kind of crazy. You can see that also these changes in working conditions, the worse they get, the more that ideas like socialism gain backing. So similar to now, where there's new unions and strikes for companies like Amazon and Starbucks, and the Writers Guild of America have recently been on strike.
Oh, I heard about that.
Yeah, because they've just been being completely underpaid and exploited for all of their writing. So you can see how that kind of has been reflected in different political candidates gaining backing. Like now you can see that, the backing Bernie Sanders has, he never would have had during a time like the Red Scare or other times when, generally working conditions were better, socialism kind of wasn't as big of an idea. But that idea of unionizing and grouping together with other people in the lower class has always scared these, wealthy industrialists and the people in power, which is why these things have started to gain so much backing when working conditions are bad.
Without these low-class workers, these industrialists would not have any wealth at all. But they're being taken advantage of.
Exactly. And a lot of the times you see things like wage theft and other things that just take advantage of these workers, just that these like selfish, wealthy industrialists and corporation owners,
instead of appreciating them.
Yeah, and I even saw a article the other day that was stockholders complaining that workers were getting raises instead of the stockholders getting paid. And yeah, these people were complaining that the workers were being prioritized over the stockholders.
Oh gosh!
Wow.
So they're making it seem like it's their fault.
That pissed me off.
So sad that these workers are getting their pay.
Yeah, when it should just be a basic human right.
Did you guys hear that the 1718 anti-immigration bill passed recently?
No, I did not.
Which is kind of crazy.
I've been seeing it a lot on TikTok.
I have not, so.
And of immigrants leaving Florida.
Oh, just kidding.
Yeah, I have heard about that.
Yeah, they passed it to scare away undocumented workers because they were scared of getting their jobs taken away.
Which is kind of crazy because they're the ones doing most of the labor and pretty much running the economy there.
Real. And after it took effect, people are trying to convince them to stay. Because back then, in the Gilded Age, immigrants were willing to do anything for a job to make a living, even if the pay was low.
They just want a new life,
Exactly. And you can honestly...
They just wanted a better life,
Yeah. A lot of, white middle-class Americans will band together to, raise all of this anti-immigration sentiment, and you can kind of see how that ends up affecting on a government level.
And that goes into more of how they controlled the government back in the Gilded Age, and that was from political machines. So these political machines were overall just a big unity, like a big institution that would recruit these members into this club, and they would basically just take control over political administrations or any type of government to make sure that a party gets a majority of the vote.
Yeah, and they would create these own towns where the corporation owned all of the buildings and all of the businesses, and they would have their workers live there so that they could control every part of their lives.
And then, they could just go straight to work with no problems.
And it's kind of similar to how, even though they were outlawed, there's new loopholes that can be found today. So there's this thing going on in Disney, if you guys have heard of it, where basically Disney World is...
I love Disney.
I love Disney too.
I mean, who doesn't? But there are some people who love Disney a little bit too much, which is why they've started creating this, I don't know the name of it. I've just been calling it, it's a Disney town, where basically Disney World in Florida is taking some of the extra land that they have and pretty much are building Disney houses and, a Disney neighborhood where it's like you're living in the park, which is a little bit weird. And since normal citizens can live there and it's not just workers, it's their way of finding a loophole where it's not technically considered a political machine, but they are having their workers live in similar places.
And wasn't there going to be, reliance on Disney as well?
Yeah, and it just creates a huge reliance of the workers on the companies. And a lot of that still goes on with corporations and employers holding healthcare over their workers, which, is kind of essential for anyone who has any medical disabilities, whether it's simple or advanced or just any risk.
Seen as a perk.
Yeah, I wear glasses, and without health insurance, I would be having to pay hundreds of dollars just to be able to have one of my 5 senses. So a lot of employers will say, if you leave, we're taking away your health care. If you do this, we're taking away your health care. And they use that to take advantage of their workers.
Oh, that's so sad.
That's so messed up.
It is really interesting, though, because a lot of this economic reliance is a result of economic policies in the Gilded Age, where the entire economy was run off of free market capitalism, which was also known as laissez-faire economics, which basically meant that the government had a completely hands-off approach to everything related to economics. They didn't want to interfere in anything related to money.
Yeah, that led to monopolies controlling all the money.
A good example would be when J.P. Morgan single-handedly saved the entire U.S. bank by contributing his assets to the government. I don't know if y'all remember. About that.
Yeah.
But it's so crazy how one person can save the entire nation out of financial stress, and that really shows how overpaid and how much power he had over the nation.
Exactly. And that also just gave him more power in politics after that, because he had such a positive effect on the government that they were more willing to listen to him and make policies in his benefit. Yeah.
Use his business more often now that
use his business and just believe him and, make policies that could benefit him. And that's something you still see happening a lot today, where the wealthy have both direct and indirect control over policies. So, for example, it costs a lot of money to run a presidential campaign or just any campaign for any position. It's an insane amount of money.
However, like a millionaire or something.
Exactly.
I can't remember exactly the number, but I do know it has to be a lot.
It's a lot. And the thing is, that means that if you want to run for president, you either have to be a millionaire or have the backing of millionaires.
And, it's mostly old money. Old money
it really
is the presidency.
And so the issue is that the wealthy people fund the candidates that they think will in turn make policies that will benefit their businesses. So we end up in this loop where us as the voters and the citizens, even though we say we have direct elections of senators and a direct election of the president, it's not as direct as we think it is, because it's not like you can vote for whoever you want. And while theoretically that idea exists, you're really only voting for
what's available.
Exactly. Really only voting for one of the two that's available to you, which is completely controlled by the wealthy.
And that goes on to the values that we have as Americans. So we don't really, the younger generation doesn't really have much of a leeway, you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
So we have to listen to these traditional values that we don't want to implement. So we have these new ideas, but because we can't access to funding, we can't have much of a say.
We can't put policies in place to affect that, especially because when the people running our country are above the age of retirement in the country, it's definitely means that we have less of a say than they do.
Before you leave, we want you to think about how has policies from the Gilded Age affected the conditions of the country today, and how has it affected policies that continue to be put into place.
As well as, don't think of these as past events, but more as a lesson that we can learn for the future.
Because history repeats itself, which you can just see throughout different time periods over and over and over again. So we really need to learn how to learn from these past mistakes so that we continue to improve our country and our lives for the better in the future. Well, thank you guys for tuning in. I'm Kate.
I'm Lindsay.
And I'm Emily.
And don't forget to tune in for next episode.
Bye!